Good day, everybody. Thank you for joining us in the launching of our book on sustainable and smart spatial planning in Africa, Case Studies and Solutions. I am Pamela Duran-Diaz from the Chair of Land Management of the Technical University of Munich. And I would like to start by thanking our speakers and attendees for joining us today. To our attendees, I would like to invite you to use the Q&A function to pose your questions to our panelists. We have prepared a very special session for you. Our speakers today are Professor Walter de Vries from the Technical University of Munich, who will be joining us by a recorded message because he's having some connection problems. Mr. Jeffrey Payne, an international consultant at Jeffrey Payne and Associates and the World Bank. Dr. Immaculate Nwani from the University of Benda in South Africa, Professor Leonard Chitongo from Great Zimbabwe University, and Professor Chavunduka Munchifwa from Copperbelt University in Zambia. We're also waiting for Dr. Charles Chavunduka from the University of Zimbabwe to join us today. So the book, Sustainable and Smart Spatial Planning in Africa, Case Studies and Solutions, is an outcome of Atlan project to strengthen capacities in land governance in Africa, which I had the honor to manage for the past 4 years. And together, Charles Chavunduka, Walter de Vries, and myself co-edited this book, written by 37 authors from Zimbabwe, South Africa, Zambia, and Turkey. This book elaborates on the African interpretation of smartness using tools for smart solid waste management, e-governance, clean energy, and smart infrastructure. This book is written by African authors to give answer to African problems. It explores the smart city concept and offers innovative solutions to problems in sub-Saharan Africa. Professor Walter de Vries sent us a short video to explain the structure of the book and the bridges it builds across countries. So please let me play this for you.
Hello, my name is Walter de Vries. I'm one of the co-editors of this book, Sustainable and Smart Planning in Africa, in Southern Africa in particular. The book for me is about both practice and theory. What we try to do in the book is to explain how the theory has developed and how the theory development is also affected by how the theory is practiced. So we introduce in chapter 1, first, what sort of theories are available, what are the concepts of smart cities and smart planning and smart settlement strategies. And then we introduce, for example, that smartness does not only depend on the technology, but also on the social and organizational context in which the technologies are applied and in which the technologies are also adopted. And this aspect of social organizational adaptation and adoption is very important because the technologies are not only shaped by how people want to develop the technologies, but very much in the context in which the technologies are developing. And the specific context for this book is the African context. What makes Africa unique as compared to other regions, in my opinion, is the institutional frameworks with regards to land and with regards to planning. There's obviously, in many countries, a colonial or post-colonial legacy, which makes the situation rather specific. And there's also the tradition of a lot of customary rights and informal rights to land, which makes it very specific as compared to other countries. And this specific context, in my opinion, is very important for the degree to which these technologies can be adapted and adopted. So we conclude, therefore, also in the concluding chapter that the advancement of smart cities and smart technology planning need to take this specific context into account. Smartness is not just a concept developed in countries where people like the technologies and they develop the technologies, but it's also making these links to the specific societal context and the capacity to absorb or to adapt these technologies to their specific needs. Now, what we see in Africa and in Southern Africa in particular is that there's still quite a big problem with the registration of land. There's still quite a large number of areas where customary rights and informal rights play an important role. And at the same time, there is quite a drive to come up with new concepts for city planning, for green planning, for sustainable planning of transport and infrastructure and taking care of waste. And it is in these sort of specific contexts and in these sort of specific demands that smart technologies also need to develop. The book has shown a number of examples that these smart technologies have developed in that direction, but there's still a long way to go. And that is also our conclusion, that the smartness of the city planning and the land development in general needs to take into account these specific contexts. And for me, that is the most important conclusion. And therefore, the smart and sustainable planning exercise and theoretical development is not yet finished. And we still need to continue much further with that development. So overall, the whole book, I think, is a very good contribution to that. It provides a nice overview of various initiatives which are going on. And it also links to the sort of international theory in the chapter 1. And in the last final chapter, we see where the theory is very specific and perhaps also idiosyncratic for the Southern African context in particular.
I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope that gave you a bit of curiosity to explore the book furtherly. I see that there are comments in the chat and somebody raised their hand. I would like to encourage you to use the Q&A function and the chat to pose your questions to the panelists that we have today. A bit about the background of the book is that this book project was motivated by the government of Zimbabwe's policy on the prioritization of the development of sustainable and smart cities in the country. And there in that context, and also in the increasing of the adoption of the smart concept in sub-Saharan Africa, the University of Zimbabwe launched a call for papers for the third symposium on developing sustainable human settlements through the smart concept, finding solutions to contemporary urban and rural challenges. After the symposium was organized, this is when COVID pandemic struck, so we had to cancel the event. That we decided to turn all of these papers that were going to be presented in the symposium into a book. So, Godfrey, thank you very much for joining us today. Would you like to please tell us more about the key contributions of the book?
Well, thank you very much indeed, Pamela, for this opportunity to contribute to what is a major achievement, I think, by yourself, Walter, the other editors, and the large number of contributors from across Africa. I mean, 21 chapters, 37 contributing authors, pulling that together and getting it into a book which covers the issues and the region in great detail is a major achievement. So I'd like to congratulate you on that. And I think what the starting point I'd like to make for a contribution is that, you know, the context of Africa is very, very challenging, interesting, fascinating, and complex. It's the last region of the world to urbanize. And I would argue that it's the most complex also, because the ways in which land has traditionally been managed throughout Africa is mainly on a different basis than the one it's normally being used around the world today. In other words, market forces have replaced the traditional practice, which is the dominant one of customary land, in which land is held by one generation and then passed on to the next in as good a form as one can manage. And that system has been replaced by colonial systems and now market systems. So we're looking at different ethos in terms of managing land, different political, social, environmental, cultural, and institutional practices, all of which have to be accommodated within an incredibly short time frame. And when I worked in other countries, and being a British academic and consultant, I've always been very, very conscious of the impact that the UK has had around the world, often in a very negative way. In fact, I spent most of my career apologizing for being a white British male, having seen all the negative things that we did as a colonial power. And, you know, when you read Robert Bates's book, When Things Fell Apart, how the Westminster system of governance was imposed on Africa, which is a totally different form of governance, then you realize the difficulty that governments have now in trying to reconcile conflicting forms of managing society as well as managing land, and trying to do this as efficiently and equitably as possible with very, very limited resources. So I would say that colonialism still casts a very long shadow. And yet the other part of the context is that, as you say in the book, population growth is very, very high. I've heard reports from friends of the World Bank who've done a big study in the region, and they estimate that between 770 and 790 million additional urban residents are going to be in sub-Saharan Africa within the next 28 years, by 2050. Now that is more than the combined urban population of Europe, Canada, USA, and Mexico. And they've had 100, 200 years to provide that amount of housing and services and jobs. How sub-Saharan Africa is going to do that in 28 years is, I think, the most massive challenge any society and government can face. And it's a big challenge for the international community. I think GIZ have done very well to provide the support for this study to see how the idea of smart cities can be taken forward and put into practice. I think those are the contexts within which this is taking place. Moving on to the book itself and what you're actually talking about raises a number of issues, as far as I can see, which are going to need to be addressed and which the book does address very well. One thing that comes out from me is the distinction between aspirations and realities. I won't say which country it was, but it was a country in the region which aspires to be a middle-income country, which is a very laudable ambition. But the regulatory framework of land standards, minimum plot area, for example, in residential areas, was far greater than is normal for the majority of the population in the capital city, which of course means that if the legal minimum is greater than is possible to achieve, then by definition, a large proportion of the population will never, ever be legal. So developing regulatory frameworks and policies and standards which are based on realities as much as aspirations, I think, is a key element on this. And of course, all these things are taking place at the time of the climate crisis. And so spatial planning, as you say in the book, needs to be undertaken using whatever resources and technologies are available. Now, the whole concept, I'm not an expert in smart cities, and so I find the book particularly fascinating to see how the concept has been developed and defined and applied. And I was interested to see, for example, that you defined, or that smart cities have been defined as digital cities or technologically defined cities that use widespread broadband infrastructure to support e-governance and a global environment for public transactions. And it goes on elsewhere to say that a smart city is a harmonic blend of history with character, heritage, aesthetics, economy, and environment. Now, these are all very, very important aspects. It does raise the question, though, I think, and this is a concern I have with the substance, which the book does address very well, and that smart cities are what people perhaps want them to be. And therefore, we're using technology in order to improve policy and to implement policy. But it doesn't detract from the fact that technology is a tool like any other tool. And I like very much in the book that you're talking about the strengths from very small things like having solar panels for traffic lights. You know, so you're starting with a very small thing which can have a major impact. If we look at the congestion of traffic in many African cities, I know Nairobi fairly well, and traffic management is a major means of moving around and therefore economic efficiency. So small things like that can have a big impact. And also I noticed that you refer to some of the examples which are private sector driven, where I think there was one example I saw where there's a small city of, this is Kalulushi in Zambia, an area of only 67 hectares, which is being developed as a smart city at a cost of $550 million. So, in other words, there's some big ideas which I would think need to be questioned for their social, economic, environmental viability. And you also highlight the small examples. One of the things which I draw on from my own experience of smart cities and the way in which it can improve governance is that of Hyderabad in India, where I was in the early 1990s, just as the internet was coming into use. And because the majority of the population in the city were either illiterate or had no access, and mobile phones didn't exist at that time, what the government did was to establish some e-centers with some graduate employees, and they would be available to help anybody obtain a building permit, a passport, a marriage death certificate, or whatever else they needed. And they would give them a reference number, just like you get with a DHL or UPS parcel. And you'd be told to come back in 2 weeks or 2 months or whatever long it was supposed to take to process that application. And when you came back, if it wasn't ready, then the graduate in the e-center would phone up the relevant official and say, what's holding it up? Where's the problem? And that improved governance enormously. Now, I think the rate of take-up in smartphones, in mobile phones globally, is increasing dramatically. And I think you give examples where, certainly in South Africa, I think you say that 40% of the population have mobile phones. This is a massive opportunity for smart technology to be a means of improving social participation and social awareness of what's going on, and can be a very good force for good. But you also give a very interesting example in Rwanda, a country I know a little bit about, having worked there a couple of times. And you cite the example there of how the smart city concept has been used to promote a capitalist neoliberal approach in which the elites are benefiting and the poor are being disadvantaged. So the main conclusions I draw from the book is that smart city concepts are a modern way, and of course they've been marketed by multinational corporations. You highlight the background of the corporations that have been promoting it since it became a popular concept. IBM and Cisco you identify as having invested quite a lot of money into 2005. And of course, if you want to promote the idea and export your technology, to get a mayor to say that they're the mayor of a smart city is likely to enhance his standing and maybe access better government resources and maybe from the international community. So it was a very clever marketing tool. What I think you do in this book is a very, very comprehensive way of explaining what this means, how it applies in a very diverse regional, social, political, cultural context, and what lessons it offers for taking things forward, both good and bad. And on that basis, I think it's very important that the book is read widely by students and academics and those in the international community involved in development in the region. So I'd like to hope that the book provides the opportunity both for people involved in urban governance to see how technology can be a force for good. And I hope also that the NGO civil society communities will use the book as an opportunity to hold those in power to account and make sure that the technology is not used for the benefit of an elite or corporate interests and at the expense of the vast majority of the urban population who are living currently, 62%, as you say, of the population of urban areas in the region are living in either substandard, unregistered, or badly serviced housing. So the starting point is very, very low for the application of smart technology. The demand is absolutely without human precedent, and the potential is therefore enormous. And I think, as I say, that you highlight both small and ambitious ideas and techniques and opportunities. And I congratulate you and your co-authors and your co-editors in a major achievement produced over a very short period of time. I wish you every success. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey. We really hope to contribute to the education on the smart city concept and its applications in sub-Saharan Africa. So your contribution here is also important. Thank you. Well, the book has 21 chapters and is divided into different sections that go from the theory of sustainable and smart spatial planning, goes through the contextual approach, the goals and practices for sub-Saharan Africa, and then it abounds into the methods and tools for sustainable and smart spatial planning. So I think going from the main concept into its application is it's an interesting approach in order to develop some capacities, but from the contextual approach. We have now 3 authors from different universities who substantially contributed to the concept of the smart city and spatial planning, and we would like to hear more about their experience. Dr. Immaculate Nyangani, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Pamela. Thank you so much, viewers and fellow panelists. My name is Immaculate Nyangani. I'm from the University of Venda. We contributed a chapter into this book project, and it was me, Mr. Mukwekwe from Makadam local municipality, Professor Gumbo from University of Johannesburg, and also Mr. Makumule from Tulamela local municipality. So from our team, basically we are already collaborating with each other from different local organizations, and we're understanding the concept of a smart village. We said we don't want to look at a city because our context really is not a city. We are from a rural South African context, and therefore we need to tailor-make this debate to fit into our own perspective. That's why I'm saying I really like the issue of context to be deliberated in detail and try to make sure that we come up with debates that are contextualized. So we looked at a real case study, a real life situation of people from a small village in here in Limpopo province, and the village is called Lenja, where a number of households were displaced when they wanted to build a dam. So from that particular project, the dam project, there came an opportunity of this particular village, which we were looking at in terms of smart. And we realized that every space can be smartized, if so to say, if we want. But how we do it can be very much different. And we realized that the social organization, the structure, the issue of land rights, like Prof. Tim said, those issues are quite important. But one thing that we realized is from this particular project, there is some kind of distortion in terms of development now, which we are now pushing through collaboration with the local municipality to say, can we make other villages that did not benefit from this relocation project through dam construction also benefit from this sustainable smart spatial planning practice, because we realized that sustainable smart spatial planning actually is the key to modern planning methodologies and also to modern planning endeavors, because as a team, we realized that this particular village is very small, but it is actually getting a lot of smart items in terms of services, in terms of land governance, in terms of also transformation itself. But key to it is collaboration and the willingness of the locals to participate. So basically, that's our project, and we are very happy that we are receiving a lot of positive comments from people who are already reviewing and seeing that smartness is not only smartness from a city's perspective, the mega cities, big cities and stuff, but we can also contextualize it to meet and understand it from a local perspective, because issues of space production are localized. That's how we were arguing, and I think we really like our publication. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Immaculate. Yes, you're totally right. I think the allocation of space in Africa should move away from a colonialist approach and need to develop our own solutions to our own problems. So thank you very much. Professor Chitongo, do you like to add anything from your perspective on Zimbabwe?
Okay, thank you very much. Let me share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes. Could you please go to presentation mode?
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm glad to have contributed to this book project, which is looking or emphasizing on the smart city concepts. We contributed chapter 11, which is the opportunities and constraints of solar harvesting as a sustainable and resilient strategy in Zimbabwe, the case of Nyangani Renewable Energy in Mutoko District. The lead author was Enock Mukwekwe, myself, and Mr. Godwin Zingi. As a way of introduction, we see that climate change has affected development discourse, and this has influenced social, spatial, and environmental planning. There is now a move towards renewable energy, whereby according to the Paris Climate Agreement of 2015, there is overemphasis of the need for renewable energy. And according to UNDP 2018, having access to energy is one of the most important issues affecting developing countries. Zimbabwe is a developing country, and specifically this research was looking at a rural area, Mutoko District Council. It falls in Mashonaland East Province of Zimbabwe. Thus, it has a rural focus. But what is also important is that this Mutoko District Council is more like the growth center within the area. Target 7.1 of this Sustainable SDG 7 emphasizes the need for provision of energy, which is affordable, reliable, and modern by 2030. So when we look at renewable energy in the form of solar energy, we see that this is affordable, it is reliable, and this is in line with Agenda 2030. The problem which motivated our research is that in Zimbabwe, we have a lot of economic challenges, and that is according to Chitongo et al. 2020. And this has affected even the provision of services, including the provision of electricity. Therefore, as the aim of our study, we examined how the adoption of renewable energy, and in this case, solar energy, how this has contributed to the issue of smart development and also of the issue of urban resilience. Thus, we had a dual approach in terms of the conceptual framework. Firstly, in terms of urban resilience talks about adapting to changes. And in this case, it's adapting to climate issues. It's also, urban resilience also talks of economic resilience. So in terms of affordability, it covers also economic resilience. And it also covers in terms of ecological resilience, in terms of reducing the use of other forms of energies which could degrade the environment. The second conceptual framework was the smart city concept. And according to Lombardi et al. 2012, this smart city is a status given to a city that fuses information and community technologies. And it also even emphasizes and also looks at smart energy. That's our chapter is emphasizing the issue of smart energy. We used a mixed method approach to gather our data. And it's very important to understand that within our study, there are three major stakeholders or partners. This is a public-private partnership whereby Nyangani Renewable Energy is the private player. Then we have Mutoko District Council being part of a decentralized governance mode. And then we also have in partnership with the Zimbabwe Electricity Transmission and Distribution Company. So the whole idea of this project was to ensure that there is a contribution to the national grid of solar energy. This is where the Nyangani Renewable Energy is having some form of collaboration with the electricity company in Zimbabwe in collaboration with the local authority. That's from a historical perspective. The first smart city is Los Angeles in the 1970s. And then this smart city concept is now a global phenomenon which has spread to all over the world, including Zimbabwe. Thus, in the face of massive developments in most cities, there is now an orientation towards sustainable energy provision in order to achieve sustainability. So our major conclusions or issues are that in terms of use of solar energy as a resilience strategy in Mutoko, this has generated employment because this is a massive program which employs several people. And it has also coming up as a climate change mitigation strategies by reducing emissions and its affordability, as I have alluded before. There are several challenges that have been faced in the implementation of the project. In terms of policy environment, the issues of monopoly, because we are having the electricity company collaborating with private players, and this has also been a major challenge. And we also discovered that as much as the project is contributing to the national grid in electricity, but there is increased load shedding generally, such that even the amount of energy which is being generated is not enough. Hence, there is still increased load shedding despite the provision of this joint association. Thus, the several challenges in this partnership are in the form of lack of funds and the lack of infrastructure to bring up a sustainable option in terms of energy provision. Thus, as a matter of conclusion, we concluded that the global aspiration to achieve sustainable development can only be attained towards smart energy or towards renewable energy in light of climate change, which is a reality. Therefore, there is need to bring or to build synergies in a holistic manner for the provision of this smart energy. This is in line with the new urban agenda. Thus, the major recommendation is the integrated approach towards provision of reliable energy. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Chitongo, for this insight. Professor Ephraim, would you like to add anything from the Zambian experience?
Thank you, Pamela, and thank you for the opportunity to be able to just speak a little bit in terms of our chapter. We are looking at the smart city concept from the Zambian perspective. What we note from the literature is that there's obviously a lot of sides that you can look at this concept of a smart city. And already we have Leonard, Immaculator, and Payne talking about different sides of what this smart city concept is about. So our chapter with my colleague, Niraj Jain from the Copperbelt University, we from the Department of Real Estate Studies. So we got together and just to try and think about what it means in the Zambian context. Because like Immaculator said, it's important to view these smart city issues within our environments, because what we see is that a lot of people are very excited about it, then they start building all these grandiose projects, which at the end do not work in the African context. Because the problem is that we have very basic problems that we have to start with before we start having these very nice dream type of projects. So we have, for instance, just very basic things on poverty issues that we have to look at in our various contexts within the Zambian or the African environment. For instance, just a bit of statistics on the Zambian scenario. Estimates show that we have 2.5 million houses in the country. And yet we have a deficit, a housing deficit of 2.8 million. So meaning that, in fact, we need to build in terms of built-up area for residential accommodation, we need another Zambia to build. So that's a huge project. And this is why you find in the major cities, you find 70% of the urbanites are actually in informal settlements. So that's a big problem that as a country, we have to start looking at. So even when we start talking about these smart cities, who really do we want to have in these smart cities when the majority of the population in these towns and cities cannot really afford the basic house, So who is going to buy these smart apartments? When you look across Africa, you pick a few of these projects across Africa, you find the units there, the prices of the units. Very few locals are actually able to buy these units. So the question that you start then throwing in is, who are we designing these smart cities for? So what we thought, or the approach that we took, was to try and understand what do we need to start from. So when we looked at the Zambian environment, what we see is that we have started from the top, from central government. We have what is called the Zambia Smart City Institute, but this is mainly a division within a government ministry. So their role is really to start trying to push forward e-commerce, e-governance, and issues like that. So it's starting really at central government. But when you come down to the local government level, what you find is there isn't much happening in terms of, or in the scale that many understand smart cities to be. We have smaller projects that are happening within there. And one of the projects we found, or the proposals that we saw, was the one that Payne referred to, on the Kalolushi project. I think Professor Payne did mention that earlier on. So just people coming together with these ideas, to say, okay, whatever we build, then it's a smart city. But really, what are we looking at? So we thought that we need what we call doorstep conditions that we need to have in place in order to have movement in terms of the development of our towns and cities. And the first point we made in our conclusion was that the planning systems have to work. In many of the towns and cities across Africa, the planning itself is a problem. It's not working. A lot of parts of cities are disjointed. So when you are trying to have all this modern ICT to function in a place like that, obviously without the best, it won't work. Secondly, we were saying we need to ensure that the local public institutions also work. When we start at the central government level, when the majority of the people at the local government, then again you have a problem, because it should be the councils, the local authorities at that level who have to work. But we see that a lot of these towns and cities are actually struggling. I was privileged to be part of the World Bank mission team, which went around towns and cities last month. The World Bank has been working on the Zambia Urbanization Review Project. I've been privileged to be part of that. And what you see is that a lot of these local authorities are actually struggling with the basics. So those have to work even before you bring in whatever ICT infrastructure you want to introduce. Thirdly, Africa has a challenge of bringing in ICT, which they are not able to manage. So even when we adopt this ICT infrastructure in our countries, it should be something that works. We have a lot of equipment which we've imported as Africa, and it's actually redundant. It can't work because there's this gap between where you are getting the infrastructure from and your local environment, and then you have a problem using that. The fourth one was that we need to have collaborative systems. Again, what you find on the ground is that ministries and departments, sometimes they don't talk to each other. So one part of the system is going one way, the other one is going the other way. But smart cities to work, or the form of smart cities, or the integration of the cities, means that all the actors within that space have to be working together, pulling the same direction. The last one, which we commented on, was that we need to complete the decentralization process. Centralized system, when problems are at the local level, again, it is a problem and it won't work. So you can introduce things at the higher level, but if it's not trickling down to the local level where the problems are, then we are going to have a bigger problem. So that's the way we looked at it. And even looking through what colleagues wrote in the book, it was interesting to see that, in fact, the whole thing came together, and we are all really saying the same, that even as we talk about smart cities, we should not copy these grandiose projects, but look at it as how it applies within our local environments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Efraim, for this valuable contribution. Indeed, the smart city concept doesn't mean to build with high tech. It's looking back to what we have at home, our context, verify what works and what doesn't. And as Dr. Nyangani was saying, whose smart city, whose reality counts? So it's designing for the citizens, for them to be more integrated. Also, this goes in line with what you were saying about planning. So planning is something that needs afterwards some implementation. In order to plan accordingly, we need to have access to reliable, transparent data and information. So the transparency of the institutions for us to come up with a good planning for the city that responds to the needs of the locals is crucial. Thank you very much. I can see that Dr. Charles Chavunduka has joined the panel. So Charles, thank you very much for joining. Would you like to add something to the discussion? Maybe tell us a bit more about the background of the book. Charles, we cannot hear you. I'm afraid we cannot hear Charles. I've seen a few comments in the chat. Thank you very much for joining, and we are reaching the end of this book launch. Something that I would like to add before we close is that you have already the link to get access to this book. We are also distributing this to African universities, to all of our NELGA partners. So each NELGA institution will receive one copy of this book in order to make it accessible to everybody across African universities. I would like to ask our panelists today if they would like to add anything to the discussion before we close. I will start with Jeffrey Payne. Would you like to say something? Or Dr. Nyangani, is there anything you would like to add?
Thank you so much, Pamela. Yes, I really like the presentations that we got from all the presenters, starting from Prof. Payne, from Prof. Chitongo, Prof. Efraim, and also from you. And to see that this issue of smartness is actually something that is buzzy these days, and that's where the world is going. And it's not something that is uniform or something that comes with a one size fits all, but something that can be contextualized, and it has to be citizen-driven. Issues of governance, issues of access, opportunities, they also form part of the package. But from all the presentations, I've realized that spatial planning imperatives or spatial planning functions, they remain also important vehicles in pushing this smart agenda forward. So I really like the way all the papers are speaking to each other, although I didn't even know that there were some were also working on almost a similar concept, even bringing in the issues of sustainable development goals, which makes everything very much interesting and very much packaged. And I want to believe this book is going to sell and assist a lot of scholars in terms of providing them with a platform for discussion, particularly when we look at how we contextualize these things. Thank you so much, Pam.
Thank you very much, Immaculate. Professor Chitongo, would you like to add anything?
Okay, thank you very much. I only wanted to add one issue in that for this whole concept to be sustainable, there is need to develop institutions in terms of capacity building, and there's also need to build locally and to have a participatory agenda so that this concept becomes sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Professor Ephraim, before we close.
Thank you, Pamela. Yes, I think it is important also to engage our policymakers on some of these issues, because sometimes there's so much excitement of these concepts, especially we are picking them from the international level, and there's excitement to want and apply them in our various areas. But I think it is important, like all colleagues are saying, to understand where we are in this process of development and be able to design our own things that we call smart within what we are doing, or that helps us to integrate, to be more efficient, and to move forward as towns and cities. So a book like this, I think it is important that it's also available to policymakers so that they can also be able to look through and see where the thinking is when it comes to applying these concepts within our African context. Thank you.
Indeed, thank you very much. We have a couple of comments in the chat. I will read them out loud. One is from Amani Luiso from Ankara University, but originally from Tanzania. He indeed agrees with Professor Ephraim as well as with Professor Payne, as most of the southern Saharan African cities, most important is to allow smooth land acquisition and smooth transfer from village to urban land as an important enabler of all planning activities, which comes after smart cities, satellite cities, decongestion and hygiene matters. So thank you very much for your contribution. And also Samuel Alananga, very interesting launch. Thank you very much. We can make it a reality, whether urban or rural. So thank you. I think this is the bottom line. Thank you to our attendees, and thank you to my colleague panelists for joining the session. We are really hoping to contribute to African education and sustainability with this book, and we are hoping for more collaboration in the near future. I am wishing you all a very nice day. And again, thank you for joining. Please don't forget to look at the link provided at the event. You will receive also a survey in the end. And you will receive also the recording of this book launch. Thank you. Have a lovely day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Well done, Pamela.
Thank you.